Hello, and welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and I have been told many times that I speak too fast on this podcast, so here I am, slowing it down. This chat is with Matt Haworth, an art director and background supervisor at Mukpuddy, an animation studio based in Auckland, New Zealand. In our chat, he's going to share how difficult it was to build an animation career in New Zealand when there wasn't really any steady long-term gigs going around. He's also going to dive into what it was like helping build Mukpuddy from a super tight-knit team into a growing studio of over 50, and what kind of projects led to that growth. Now, before we dive in, if you enjoy listening to this podcast every week and would like to help me keep it running, consider dropping a few dollars on my Patreon. I've included a link in the description of this chat. And now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, Matt. How you doing today?
Kia ora. Hi, Terry. Good. It's morning here, which is a little bit weird.
Yeah, okay. So you're in New Zealand, which is complete opposite end of the world, and I'm in Toronto, and somehow you found my podcast and listened to over 100 How did you find my podcast, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, probably going through Spotify, listening to a bunch of different ones, and eventually get recommended one that sort of hits for you. I also remember Heath Kenny mentioning he was about to come on your show. Same with Jeremy Nixon. So, as I said, all Kiwis really do know each other.
Yeah,
so
somehow
probably have had more on there.
The most listened to episode, I think, or one of the most, like on YouTube, it has like 20 or 30,000 listens or something, now, which is crazy.
I think everyone knows him. Just one of those guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. Everybody knows him. Okay, so you listened to over 100 episodes, which I'm super impressed at. How long did that take you?
It was, I mean, I started, let's see, midway through sort of the COVID pandemic-y stuff. So the end of 2021, we went into our longest lockdown here in Auckland. So it was a lot of working from home.
Yeah.
And a lot of being a little bit isolated and missing people in the studio. And I think like a lot of people, we listen to podcasts while we work when you can't turn around and chat to the people in the room behind you.
Totally.
And so it was really cool to listen to people in similar struggles. Like, as I said, the fact that I was working really late nights, sometimes over the weekend. We try not to do that now, but I was definitely doing it during lockdown when like your routine gets all screwy. And then listening to other people going through similar stuff, even if it's on the other side of the world or if they were in completely different projects, it's really cool. So yeah.
I mean, that seems it is cool, but also there's like a depressing side of it where you're like, you're working late, we're listening to other people working late. All right, last question on the podcasting. You've listened to over 100 episodes. What do you wish that I ask or the topic leads into more? Is there something that you want more out of the podcast, listening to so many? Like, is there something where you're like, oh, I wish we always talked about this, or I wish they asked this? And then I'm going to ask it to you, of course.
No, totally. Well, I think the thing that I've been struggling with in the last sort of 4 to 5 years, as I've gotten busier and busier in this industry, is how to maintain the work-life balance stuff. So talking about, the fact that you sometimes have to work really late. Sometimes you have to take projects really quickly, especially if you need the money for them, or if a deadline comes in and you're like, okay, we just need to make this happen.
Yeah.
Then having to also like have a life outside of it all is really tricky. Like it's a weird job that we do. It's sometimes not appreciated in certain aspects, particularly financially. So sometimes you have to take on more work. That's just how it is. And then I still want to have a life. I want to turn off my brain and not do just work stuff after a certain bit of time. But, we're also in a creative industry where your brain needs to keep ticking on stuff. You're constantly thinking about the next idea, or you're problem solving something that you might have put down 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But there's a little part of your brain that's still trying to work it out. So that's the stuff that I'm struggling with, or I've been working on in the last few years, and I'm getting better at it. But I do wonder, I think that is something a lot of creatives, particularly in the animation industry, struggle with.
Totally, yeah, 100%.
So I'm always interested in how people do it. Like I've been cooking more, I've been swimming more, that sort of thing. But otherwise, it's difficult.
I think, the people I've talked to and myself as well, I just make boundaries. For
Oh,
instance, like I just told myself I'm going to stop answering any work related email on a weekend, which is
yep.
really tough when, like, for instance, I run this podcast and I'm connecting with people sometimes over the weekend, but I just told myself I'm going to stop doing that.
Yeah.
However, I didn't follow my own rule this past weekend, even though it was a holiday because I worked the whole weekend.
Yep.
But
Yeah, it always
what would
happens.
cause you to say no to a deadline or a project and instead get that mental break and work-life balance that you wish you had? What would cause you to say, no, I'm not going to take this crazy deadline. No, I'm
Yep.
not going to rush this job.
Well, it is way better now that I have a little bit more financial stability and the studio's running smoothly and everything like that. Like we have a little bit of breathing room, which is good. Um, but also the other thing is, even if a deadline comes through, because we are a studio with many hands, if a deadline comes through and it's really tight, we can just be like, hey, who wants help on this? Like, can we
Yeah.
get more hands on this to make it easier? Um, so we're definitely getting better at it. Having a partner who works regular hours is also huge. I want to see the people in my life that I love. That
Yeah.
is a huge part of it, right? And I don't want to be distracted while hanging out with them, because that's also, as I said, another part of it.
So you mentioned the finances. So if
Mm,
you feel in a better financial place, you're
mhm.
willing to say no to more things.
Yes, which is very privileged, and it hasn't
Yeah.
always been the case. But yeah, I think so. Or
So
at least
does this mean you're sacrificing your mental health and work-life balance for finances, I guess? Because you could also just say no and not have the money
totally,
and not, I don't know,
absolutely.
go on a
Yeah,
vacation
yeah,
every so often.
totally. Well, I mean, yeah, I've recently been overseas to Rarotonga, and that was the first time I've been overseas on an overseas holiday in 10 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, that sort of speaks to it. So, not only, with the studio stuff now, but doing freelancing for so long, you sometimes feel like you can't take those breaks, or you feel like you
Totally, yeah.
can't, if you stop the momentum of the train rolling, like that's going to be it. And now I just know that's not the case, and it's not worth it, even if that was the case. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not worth it.
So maybe last question on this,
Mhm.
you said the studio is getting to a good place. Does this mean you've
Mm.
changed the type of projects that your studio is taking that allow for more balance? Or have you just reached a point where you don't have to hustle so much to get the client work and get things done? Or like I'm just wondering how because the studio is 20 years old, you've been working
Mm.
there for the past what 7 years or something like that.
Yeah, 7, 8 years now. Yeah,
So, like, what has been the main progress? Because that's a long time. 7 years is a long time.
yeah.
What has been the main change over time that has allowed you to say, I'm going to have a better work-life balance now?
Mm. Yeah, well, and the studio is called Mukpuddy, so we're Mukpuddy Animation.
Yes.
And we do primarily 2D kids content. So we create our own shows. We also do a lot of service work. We've been doing more service work in the last few years. And more recently, we've gotten a a chunk of money from the film commission to make a bigger project, which has been huge. So we're gearing up for that now. Um, but yeah, the main difference is, that mixture of service work and our own IPs have
Yeah.
just built up over the last little while. We've built this runway. We're finally building momentum. Where, even during all of the lockdown stuff, during all the pandemic, which I know the pandemic isn't over at all, but just saying during all that time we were able to still bring in service work because we have a bit of a reputation now. People know about us. It's easier to go out there and ask, like, hey, you know, where's
That's
this
it.
work going to come
Yeah.
from? Yeah, that's cool.
Um, I have so many questions to ask, but I think I'm just going to keep going with this flow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you mentioned creating your own IPs, which is kind of the
Mm,
dream of many studios.
yep.
But a lot of studios find that they get caught up in the service work to keep the lights
Mm,
on,
yep.
and then to develop, and then take money and time away from the artists that they currently have to
Hmm.
develop their own IPs and start learning that from scratch and the whole sales process and finding partners. It takes a lot
Mm,
of time and effort. So, what was the, I guess, energy that you in the studio had to put in to reach a state where you have both service work and your own IPs going at the same time,
And it's quite a juggle. So as a brief history, Mukpuddy was started in 2001 with three friends from animation college, so Alex, Ryan, and Tim. So they're the three Mucks. So they just met in their animation course, got on really well, and thought, hey, let's, we want to make stuff. And they started just making stuff out of the basement. They worked from there, making a bunch of web series and stuff that they just released for free. Just early days of the internet. It was downloading QuickTimes. It was, uploading stuff to blog spots, all that sort of thing. No YouTube yet at that point. Slowly built a name in New Zealand, so doing things like music videos. They eventually got a spot on a after school. I don't know what you call it. There was an after school program that had like a segment in it that was perfect for animation. And they said, okay, cool, we'll take that spot and we're going to make a short animated piece to slot in there to this, mostly variety show. And they were able to do it, and they pumped out 1 4 to 5 minute piece of animation a week, which is insane, with just 3 of them.
Wow.
Which is, never been done before on that network, not with a deadline like that, which was really cool. So it was called Sparkle Friends, which I grew up watching, which was really cool. They then started to take that same format of making a real quick, it was kind of a quick and dirty turnaround for a cartoon like that, and took those skills and used them in a 48-hour film competition. So they have them all around the world, but in New Zealand it was the 48-hour film fest, which is the idea is you make a film in 48 hours. So you have a weekend and you make a film. And they were the first animated entry to ever try it, and they won the very first year, which is awesome. They continued to do that for a few years, building more of a name for themselves. Again, still doing the ad stuff, still doing music videos, until eventually they started pitching their own bigger IPs. And they got a show called The Barefoot Bandits off the ground, which was going to be a network sitcom playing here. So it was going to play on prime time right after The Simpsons. It had a perfect sort of lead into The Simpsons, this crazy show about it was the Kiwi Goonies, basically. It was a bunch of kids running around getting into mischief with some cool supernatural and horror elements in there. And with that show, that was sort of the big push, and they were able to go from 3 people to 15 for the first time.
Yeah, wow.
So, and that was in 2000 and 14, 15, they got that. So again, you've got all those years in between of slowly building up this momentum with...
There were 3 people for over 10 years?
Yep, absolutely.
Wow. That sounds super fun, but also a little bit insane, I guess, because it also sounds like they were mass producing a ton of animation.
Yep.
So
and not just animation as well. Like they were doing, they started a movie magazine, basically. They started anything that they could get their creative hands on. So they created a magazine basically so they could sell the comics right at the back, so that they could get their comics out into the public, which is, again, a crazy thing to do because there isn't a lot of comic distribution in New Zealand, particularly at that point. So they were like, "Hey, we'll make it," and that's sort of the whole mentality all the way.
Is the magazine still running to this day?
It's not, no. But yeah, so they just kept on rolling from 3 people to 15, then from the Barefoot Bandits. So there are 2 seasons of that. I came on board around then to help with some smaller web series they were working on. So we did a show called Pipima, which is a preschool show all set in Te Reo Māori, and a bunch of other like smaller web shows and stuff like that. And then in 2018, got a bigger show with it was an Australian idea that eventually came through that they sort of reworked as a Mukpuddy idea, called Quimbo's Quest.
Okay.
which was a 52 episode sitcom, this zany little character. And yeah, from there the studio grew from 15 to 50,
Wow.
which is crazy.
So they actually kind of grew through IPs versus getting more and
Yep.
more service work, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I have questions about that, but you talked a little bit about where you came on. I'm wondering
Hmm.
if you can share your story a little bit. So I know you went to
Mm.
animation school
Yep.
and you met these guys there, and you were like,
Yeah,
these are
they came in to
my,
do a talk.
yeah, okay.
They came in to do a talk about their show Sparkle Friends, which was it had just finished at that point, and they were working on another smaller show called Crumbs. Um, and they came in to do a talk to talk about, the opportunities in the industry, which in New Zealand is quite limited.
Yeah.
At that point, there were a few studios doing animation stuff, but none of them making like the type of cartoons that I wanted to see and make, the stuff that I
What's the
watched
name of the
growing up.
school you went to?
At that point, it was called Freelance Animation School.
Ah,
It's now called UB. So it's the same school that Jeremy Nix and Heath Kenny and most New Zealand animators have gone through,
the
including the Three
5 New
Mucks.
Zealand animators.
Yeah, exactly,
How many people
exactly.
are in each year in the program? I'm just curious.
Ooh, a lot. I had 50 in my year.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, but unfortunately, with the state of the industry, because it is quite small, I think I'm potentially the only one working in the industry,
Oh
which
wow.
sort of, yeah, which sort of says something for the fact that, we are a small country down here, and to retain people in New Zealand can be really tricky because
So
there's only a few
most
studios.
people go to a different country after that? Because it sounds like there's a lot of
Absolutely.
demand for people who want to be animators, or
Absolutely, huge
supply,
demand.
no demand.
Absolutely. Yeah, 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 no. Or people are really interested in learning the skill
Yeah.
and yeah, so a lot of people go overseas, or they have to change career paths or become or just diversify. So that's actually what I ended up doing. So I studied there for 2 years, got a
Yeah.
bunch of diplomas. It was classical 2D flipping animation back then. It wasn't
Okay.
even like Toon Boom or Flash or anything like that. So I think I was there the last year they had the drawing desks. So
Hmm.
I would have learnt some digital stuff after that, but I was slightly too early. I went very young. I went at 16 thinking, oh, I'll get this under my belt and be a professional animator once I'm done. And then they took away all the drawing desks and I was like, oh, we have to use a computer, do we? Okay. Um,
So
yeah.
did you get hired right out of school then, or did you have to change career paths for a bit? Like you said, a lot of people do.
Yeah, so I graduated. I then tried to do some 3D. So I actually went to an animation course at a different school to learn 3D for about a year. I had to drop out of that course. The reason was I actually got diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which
Oh,
is a crazy thing to be diagnosed with in your late teens. Most people are
yeah.
diagnosed as a baby. So it was a big spanner in the works that was thrown in there. I'd always been a little bit sick growing up, but we didn't know how intense it was going to be. So at that point, cystic fibrosis was, and it still is a huge deal. Like it affects a lot of people across the world. And me at the ripe age of 20, I was about to turn 20, and I got this diagnosis. And I thought, okay, cool. I'm gonna. The plan was I'd go to this other animation course. I'd already been getting job offers and stuff through my storyboarding work and my illustration portfolios. So I was like, cool. I'll just pick up one more sort of degree course, and then I'll be in the studio system. It'll be great. Work from there. And then I got this diagnosis, which sort of threw a big spanner in the works because it takes a lot of physio, a lot of energy, a lot of just I had to reprioritize everything in my life because all of a sudden I have a disease, which at that point was a terminal disease, that gives you one with a life expectancy, which was pretty crazy to hear.
Yeah.
So I had to reprioritize everything, as I said. So I
What was going
poured,
through your mind mentally at that point when you got diagnosed and you just, spent a couple of years working towards this career that you wanted?
yeah. Well, it was weird because I really thought like everything was about to jump off. I was super excited. As I said, I'd studied all my high school exams early so I could go to animation college early.
Oh
I
wow,
did all that
you
stuff.
were so motivated.
Yeah, I was like, here we go. And then yeah, after doing some tests, I got diagnosed. And yeah, it was a weird thing because it was a big, it felt like a roadblock. I sort of say that now thinking back, but I'm sure at the time it was far more traumatic, to be honest,
Yeah.
because it was this whole thing of I thought I had my life mapped out. I thought, here we go, this is going to be smooth sailing, everything's working in the right direction. And then I had to pull out of the animation course because I needed to prioritize on my health. Had a whole new physio regime that I needed to do, had to speak to all these specialists. Yeah, lots of complications thrown in there. So I
Wow.
sort of took a year off to recenter around all the, not only around the physical health stuff, but the mental health stuff too. Because it's, at 20, when you think you've got a certain roadmap ahead of you, when that sort of changes, yeah, it changes your perspective a little bit. I wasn't too negative at the time, which is really good. I think it shows I had a good support network around me, and my parents were super supportive and everything like that. They were like, cool, move back home, stay at home, you can live rent free for a while. So again, it's the privilege of having that safety net was huge. And the other thing was I had this physio regime that meant I couldn't do a normal 9 to 5 at the time.
Yeah.
Because I had to do 3 hours of physio at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. So I was like, how am I
3
going to squeeze
hours
this in?
twice a day?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, totally. Yeah, 3 hours. So about an hour of that on a nebulizer and then running and all sorts of stuff as well. So it was pretty intense, particularly early on. I will say, I'll spoil the story but technology has advanced in those last 10 years. There's now a miracle pill, they're calling it, called, I take one called Kaleido, but there's another one called Trikafta, which has vastly become available all around the world, but it's just been approved in New Zealand for everybody. And it basically, it kind of cures cystic fibrosis to a certain extent, which is
Wow.
fucking incredible.
Yeah. That is
So it just
amazing.
means, yeah, exactly. So not only for me, I started taking it a few years ago, but now for everyone in New Zealand and for most developed parts of the world, cystic fibrosis is no longer going to be a huge part of their lives. It's still always going to be there, but it's not going to be this debilitating, life-shortening thing.
Got
So
you.
super, super grateful for that.
Do you still have to do the physio and routines and
I
things?
do, but I do like half an hour either end of the day, and I take
Oh
a shit
wow.
ton of pills, but that's about it. It's so much easier.
Well,
So
that's very bad news and very good news.
exactly. So yeah, but at the time it was like a lot to take on,
Yeah, for sure.
as you can imagine. And I also knew that I needed to not only stay busy creatively, but I needed a job, I needed an income. So I started an illustration business doing any sort of work I could get my hands on. So doing everything from kids books illustrations through to I did storyboarding, I did logo design, anything where it was like this could be, Wacom pen on tablet. If I can
Yeah.
draw it, if someone will pay for me to do it, I'll do it. I did everything. Lots of storyboard work, lots of ad work, all that sort of thing. And alongside that, I started running after school classes for kids,
Oh,
teaching them to draw. So that was the other part, because I realized very quickly when you start a freelance graphic design business out of nowhere, at first it's very slow going, trying to get clients, trying to build a
yeah.
name for yourself. So I built this teaching business alongside it, which I knew would keep consistent money coming through, and I knew what at
Did you just
least the
reach
last
out
few
to your
hours of my
local
day for.
schools and say, "Hey"?
Basically, yeah, and a lot of it was run through community centers. So I'd book my
Oh,
own I'd book the venues, I had website, would do it all myself. So it was all fully independent.
wow.
Um, yeah, and at one point I was doing that 6 days a week, teaching over 100 kids across the city.
Oh my gosh.
It was great, and it was this weird business that came out of nowhere. It came out of a necessity of having, I needed something to do, needed something to uh
Were you
I'm
still
not gonna
thinking about animation this whole time, getting back into it?
Yeah. So while this was going, particularly once the business, the after school teaching business got a bit more secure and I had a little bit more time, I started diving back into studio work.
Hmm.
So there were a few studios around Auckland. I'd just do a contract here or there. But I found it pretty cutthroat. The fact of you do a job for, it could be as much as 6 months. You get to know everybody, and then the job disappears. And that was just the nature of the industry. But I found that didn't give me the stability that I really wanted. I wanted to be there with a community. I wanted to make stuff with a crew. And so I thought for the longest time that the studio game wasn't for me, until I started working at Mukpuddy.
So what changed about your mentality? Because you had this stable thing going with kids, which is like you're building a community, you're watching people develop and grow over time. And then you're getting cut from studios. And then you just happen upon Mukpuddy because you're still looking for work, or?
Well, I'd always stayed friends with them. Like we'd meet up at conventions because, doing illustration, I'd be at conventions or art markets, even selling stuff. So I built a good friendship with the guys. And then out of the blue, they were like, hey, do you want to come on and do some backgrounds for us? And I was like, cool, yeah, yes. Sure. It was very casual. I was like, cool, I'll jump on and do some of these. And that went really well. And I loved the guys. And slowly it just built. I'd do, one job a year, then 2 jobs a year, and then they asked me to come in to be the background supervisor for Quimbo's Quest, and I was like, yeah, sure, not really knowing how big a job it would turn into. And at that point I was still teaching, I was still doing some freelancing on the side.
So you were going into their studio and then heading back home and then traveling to schools and then heading back home every day?
I was doing the studio stuff from home at that point. So it just felt like other freelancing work to a certain extent until the Quimbo's Quest job kicked off, which was a bigger job, much bigger team. And all of a sudden I was like, this is what I want. This is a crew of 50 people, this ragtag, bunch of pirates that we were all, gathered together trying to make this thing with not a lot of time. We made 52 episodes of a 10-minute sitcom, adventure animated sitcom in 9 months.
What?
Which was a
I thought you were going to say 2 years, 9 months. Nope. Oh my gosh. It takes me that long to make one 10-minute episode.
Yep. All 2D. I think we got close to 2,000 finely painted backgrounds over the whole thing.
Yeah, wow.
But it was the most fun. It was a lot of work and it was stressful, but it was the most fun. But the part that I got from it was the community aspect. The fact it was a bunch of people all making something together. And even when it was stressful, you were in it together. And that was huge. And that's what I missed from doing freelancing, which is if it's stressful, it's just sort of you there.
But how does that different than when you were on a freelance project for 6 months and then at the end of it, it's gone, versus you're on a freelance? I mean, it's not a freelance, it kind of is a freelance project for 9 months. How is that too different? Just you're staying at the studio afterwards?
I mean, it was also the fact of Mukpuddy do things a little bit differently. We're a full service studio, so we do everything from the writing through the storyboards, edits, sound recording, animation, background, comping. We do every part of it.
That's crazy to me. Especially that you also do sound.
Yeah. No, it's voice records everything. A lot of our writers are voice artists, so they'll also be performing on the shows. Like Ryan, who's one of the original Mucks. He's the head writer. He directs every episode, and he's in a lot of our shows. So
I'm just a random question, because in the US and Canada, there are unions for voice actors, writers, etc. How do you work?
So in New Zealand, because the industry is so small, we don't even have the animation unions and stuff like that.
Well, we don't have an animation union here in Canada, but if you want to hire a writer for a show, there are rates you have to hit and things like that. But
we still have to do that. It still all has to be in the budget and everything like that. But the difference is we have the versatility where Ryan can sort of, he can hire himself quickly if we need a line for something.
Hire himself quickly.
Yeah, we can make that sort of stuff happen.
So that must be a key selling feature for Mukpuddy, that when you go to a client, you're just like, you need anything, we'll do it all.
Totally.
We'll do the whole thing from start to finish.
Yeah, and that's actually what happened with Quimbo's Quest. They came to us with this idea and they're like, hey, we just want you to animate it. And the more we started speaking to them, the Mucks were like, we can just write this for you. Like, if the deadline's that tight, we can do it, and we know how to write, we know how to do everything else. And I think that's sort of one of the other key parts, is we know how to write for animation, we know how to write it
Yeah.
that works for our deadlines, which is
Does
great.
that because there's like some schools of thought, and one is like you really have to focus on one thing to become an expert
Hmm.
at it,
Hmm.
versus a school of thought of like being a jack of all trades and you can do anything. Does that
Hmm.
set you up for opportunities that you might not get, or does it set you up
Absolutely.
for failing at some opportunities because you don't focus on that one thing?
It definitely could be that. I think that we're really good at what we do.
Yeah.
So I think we are really good at the stuff that we focus on. And that, again, asking why did I stay here rather than go to another studio? It was the fact that I could see, like, I can learn directing here. I can
Yeah.
help writing. I can, I saw opportunities where I could try different stuff out. And that's definitely what's happened. Like, I went
Yeah,
from
that's
background artist to background supervisor to art director. And because we are still a reasonably small studio as far as, like, a full service studio goes, people do multiple jobs. So sometimes I'll be giving storyboarders direction on stuff, or script rewrites. I get to do a little bit of everything, and that's awesome. That's always what I wanted to do.
I mean, that's kind of like what I like to do. I like to have my
Mm,
hands in everything, because like pigeonholing myself in one thing, it's great because you get better at it, but over time it gets a little I feel less inspired, and I feel more inspired to do other things, I guess.
yeah,
Like I'm really excited to like direct versus like storyboard versus like just storyboard the rest of my life, for instance. So
yeah.
what kind of people, you're building a community, you're growing your
Hmm.
studio, you said you're 50, 60 people now. What kind of
Hmm.
people are you hiring at Mukpuddy? Are you hiring people that can do everything, or are you specializing more in like just hiring a storyboard artist? Like a traditional studio would just
Hmm.
hire somebody that can only do one thing, and then that's all they do.
First and foremost, like, the drawing skills have to be there for any part of the job for us. So even when we're hiring animators, we work a lot in Flash or Adobe Animate. Like, that's how we've
Yeah.
made pretty much all our stuff up until now. So we're about to transition over to doing more Toon Boom stuff. Um,
Flash is listening to this being like, no,
and look,
we're trying so hard.
we have done stuff with Flash that you would not believe. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think we've pushed it to its limits, and we'll probably always use it, but we're also starting to use Toon Boom now. So even though we do sort of rigged animation, those drawing skills are always really important. Um, when hiring, I think we do look for someone who has a little bit of uh, the variety, be able to do a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
So, like, we have storyboard artists who are also going to do some backgrounds for us. We have animators who also are really into writing. So we do want to foster
Hmm.
not only that artist or that animator, we want to foster their career and their career in the studio potentially.
Yeah.
So, the same way I came on and I just started drawing some backgrounds for a web series however many
Totally.
years ago. And now, I'm there helping pitch shows and directing stuff, as well
Yeah.
as I still love drawing the backgrounds, to be honest. I still like making pretty pictures. But yeah, I think that's something we look for, is a little bit of a drive from people where they are interested in any part of the process. And also, just don't be a dick. That's the main thing, if I'm honest, when
That's what
hiring.
everybody says. Don't be a dick. Don't be an
Yeah,
asshole, etc. No, that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense, and I think that's really cool, especially that you kind of grew by pitching your own ideas, and to pitch your own ideas, you
Hmm.
need a lot of internal creativity. So that's really interesting.
Absolutely. And that has
Yeah.
already happened. Like, we had a animatic editor who came on for Quimbo's Quest,
Yeah.
Becky Quake, and she then pitched a show sort of to the local funding body and got that over the line and got funding for that. And she's now made 2 series of that show here with
Wow.
everyone at Mukpuddy, which is incredible. And she, it was her first ever animation gig. She's an actor, but she came on board to edit some animatics and was like, hey, I get the hang of this. And then she wrote a really cool pitch Bible, got a bunch of people to help with the artwork, and we managed to get it funded. And then, it's 2 seasons later, and it's one of the prettiest things we've done. And that
Amazing.
started from somebody who was hired not necessarily as, the most creative of roles, on paper, but we knew that this person was versatile and had a love for the craft.
So,
And yeah, it
so
turned into
your
this awesome
culture
thing.
actively fosters this type of thing? Like
As
she
much
felt
as possible, yeah.
comfortable, like kind of putting it in your hands? Because because I've been through the pitching process, and there are lawyers involved, and it takes years and negotiations, and everybody wants their piece of the pie and type of thing. So I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit now that you've?
Totally.
Yeah.
She still did it. She started up a production company through her name. So she still had fully creative control over it, but she then trusted us as, the heads of department who were working on the actual content, trusted us because she knew us all to produce the best stuff possible.
Cool.
So even though it was still, it was under her name and it was her IP
Yeah.
for this particular project. But there was so much trust going both ways, which is huge.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, you've been involved in the pitching process, et cetera, and Mukpuddy's gotten a couple of things off the ground, which I think is amazing. Can you speak to, what does it take to create an idea that gets funded, for instance? Are you, when you're looking at the original idea, are you just creating, what you would love to see in the world? Are you looking at the world and saying, what does it need right now?
A little bit of both. We definitely go from the point of view of what would we want to see.
Yeah.
Like, I think you've got to make the content you want to see. Like, you've got to be the biggest fans of it first. I really think that's important. It also means that you're going to be the biggest, sellers of it. You're the ones who's going to be the most excited about this project. So it has to come from a place of love. And also, to be honest, just throwing everything at a wall. We've pitched a lot of shows over the last little while.
What's a lot of shows? Like I'm the type, I have 3 pitches myself, and like I've put all of my energy into these pitches, and like I'm trying to get them made before I create 100 more. So like with you, what's a lot of pitches?
We aim, up until sort of last year, we aim at around 5 to 7 a year, sometimes up to 10 pitches a year.
So does that ever get exhausting with broadcasters or producing partners when they're like, oh, here's Mukpuddy again with their giant library of pitches that are still coming?
It can do, but then also, particularly in New Zealand, at least we're a known commodity and they know that we can produce it. So a lot of our pitching goes through a local government body called New Zealand On Air, which is, it's government money, so it's public money. So they've really got to make sure that the money is used wisely and correctly in a way that reflects the community.
Right.
And we have a really good track record with them, a great working relationship. We've had a bunch of shows. We've got shows like The Drawing Show, which is a sort of the Muppets meets a YouTube drawing tutorial.
Okay.
Which is super fun. Kids love it. We've got a sort of slacker comedy. Again, these are all aimed at kids, even though, a slacker slash stoner comedy wouldn't necessarily be aimed for kids. But we take that energy and we make it for kids. We take the stuff that we would still like to see. Barefoot Bandits, To Mickey Space. We've had a bunch of stuff with them over the last few years, which have, worked really well and also had a great reception from them. I'm rambling a little bit. What was the question? Sorry,
I was just wondering, what does it take to create a pitch that gets funded?
Well, yeah, particularly for, let's say for New Zealand On Air, they want to see how is it going to reflect the
community
kids.
and
exactly. So the kids in New Zealand, for one, they want to see that you can produce the work. So having a library of a big library of produced work that looks really pretty, that looks like, even if you just see it as you're scrolling through the document, you can see that looks like a show. That gives a lot of trust to them as well. And we also try, whenever possible, to provide things like animation tests or even scripts, just so they can show hey, we're prepared to do the work.
Gotcha.
Not only is it just a few pieces of key artwork, but we've thought about the whole thing as a holistic idea.
Makes sense. I mean, you're used to this. You should be used to it by now. You've been around for 20 years in the studio. So, okay, totally. You mentioned also you were feeling a little bit geographic locked with what you were putting out into the world with animation. And getting funding from the government is not essentially going to help you create something that has more of an international audience if they're specifically looking for stuff that fits within the local community. So how are you taking the experience of creating for the New Zealand public, TV and whatever
Mhm.
channels
Yep.
to breaking out into the more international markets?
Yeah, well, that sort of leads to the next big sort of point in Mukpuddy's history, which is Bad Jelly the Witch. So Bad Jelly the Witch is going to be our next big project, and it's our first like big budget international project, which is really exciting. It means the studio gets to grow again. It means we get to like show off our writing chops again to the rest of the world. It will be something we are, you know,
So I looked up Bad Jelly because I had never heard of it before, but it's a children's
ooh,
book from the 70s by an Irish author. Is that correct? Something like that?
that's right.
He like
So
wrote it
Spike,
for his kid and it took off.
that's right. So Spike Milligan is the guy. So Spike Milligan is well known in the 70s, particularly in the UK. He was in a troupe called The Goons, so a TV show called The Goon Show, and that was the big inspiration for Monty Python. So Monty
Ah,
Python sort of happened through this guy, or because of him.
interesting.
Um, and he'd do all sorts of stuff on the radio. He had a frequent BBC radio appearance, and he also wrote kids books. So he did a radio play of the kids book. It's very short. It's about 20 minutes long to listen to it. And weirdly, it was played in New Zealand every single Sunday morning through the 70s
Oh
on
wow. So it's
Radio New Zealand. There was only a few radio channels, and every single Sunday morning it would play.
so you
So
grew up
there's this.
listening. You can recite this.
Well, I can't. I can, but I was born a little bit after that. But there's definitely a generation of people who grew
Well,
up knowing the story through and through.
sorry,
But
I didn't mean to say you were that old, but I just meant
no,
like
no,
there's a
no.
culture of like this story specifically in New Zealand.
Absolutely. And from that playing on the radio, it also played like there's a history of it being in like school plays. Like every
Ah,
school does like
yeah,
a play version of this weird audio play. And
interesting.
it's a crazy story. It's a little bit Wizard of Oz-y.
Yeah, I
It's
looked up
just
the
about
synopsis and it sounded pretty crazy.
it's
Like
very
God
crazy. It's
comes in at
very
one
non
point.
yeah. Yeah, we may be removing some of the weirder stuff, the stuff that or the stuff that is
Got you.
just not appropriate now.
So you somehow got the rights to
Mhm.
create this in a pitch, or you were working with a partner, or like, how did this come across? I don't know how much you can share, but
Yeah, so Alex, one of the lead mucks, he was just drawing some
I
witches
love
one
that
day.
you
It was
call each other mucks. I mean, that's just
yeah.
hilarious to me.
I know. Yeah. We're all mucks, mucklings, but the main mucks, the three of them, so Alex, Tim, and Ryan. Alex was drawing a witch one day, and literally just was like, "Hey, we haven't seen like a definitive adaptation of Bad Jelly the Witch. I wonder who has the rights." And Ryan just put it out on Twitter to be like, "Hey, anyone know who has the rights to Bad Jelly the Witch?" Eventually got into contact, or we got an email of somebody who turned out to be Spike Milligan's old secretary.
Wow.
She was in her 80s.
Oh
She
my,
took
she's tweeting. She's looking out. She's looking out for
well,
tweets.
somebody at least found her email, and she took a long time to reply to emails, but
Yeah.
eventually we started a conversation. From there, yeah, we got in contact with the rest of the Milligan children. So and from there we pitched our idea to them, and it was this crazy thing where the guy who owned the audio rights happened to be on holiday in New Zealand, and we just brought him into the studio and we pitched him the idea, and he was like, awesome, cool. And he set us up with the right people involved, and we got the rights to Bad Jelly, which is crazy.
I don't know what to say. This sounds super
I know.
coincidental.
Yeah, no. It was a weird thing, and it just all sort of came together. So from there, now we have the rights. That's the first step. So this is like 2017, something like that. Maybe even a little bit later. So we have the rights, and the next step is trying to piece together the money for it.
Yeah.
Working with a few different producers. We've got a producer, Roger, who was really good at, finding the right people, speaking to the right people, and in amongst, starting to have conversations, then COVID hit.
Right.
So at first everything sort of settles down.
Where,
Sorry.
like when you say gathering the right money, like before, like where's the money coming from? You mentioned the government
moment,
of New Zealand is
Mhm.
offering money to make TV shows, but where
Mhm.
else, are you getting money from to potentially put, I don't know, maybe $1 million into a season of something. Like, where
Mhm.
does that money come from, essentially?
That was our big question. That was the thing. Well, we had this awesome IP now, and we were like, okay, what do we do with this? How do we do this? And then in amongst COVID, there was a special film commission grant put out from the New Zealand Film Commission,
Hmm.
looking for pitches. They initially weren't looking at animation or TV shows or anything like that, but we put together a really, really solid pitch. At this point, we teamed up with Heath Kenny and Mercury Filmworks to work together to develop sort of a really nice pitch.
Nice.
So we had Mercury Filmworks, behind us at that point too, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
Put together a really slick pitch.
Did you just call up Heath and you're like, hey, bud?
Yeah. I mean, basically, it's one of those things. He may have even got in contact with us once he heard we had the rights. It's it's one of those industries that just you
Just
got to know
tweet.
people. Totally, yeah. I know, crazy, right? But yeah, then the film commission got involved. So the film commission was the next big step.
Hmm.
So they provide enough money to bring it to an international level, and then we had to bring in some then we had to make it a international co-production, which is the stuff that's getting worked out right now.
Right.
So we will be bringing in money from overseas distributors and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's my understanding that once you have a government grant or some funding already, that becomes so much more attractive to other international partners to come on, because it makes a much more serious thing.
Absolutely. And there's this bunch of stuff which I won't go into about, tax incentives and all that sort of thing too, with certain territories. Yeah. So it was this crazy thing that, as you said, all started with a tweet, which is so bizarre.
Wow. That is
a tweet
crazy.
and then a really good pitch Bible, though. I will say it was good. We put together a really slick teaser as well to really help. And we're a few months away from it kicking off, which is crazy.
That's amazing. How does it feel, like, looking back over, you're 16 years old, you finished high school super early, jumped into animation school, got diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, had to move back in with your parents, had to figure out, how am I going to make money? You're teaching kids after school and scrambling to make logos for freelance projects on your Wacom tablet at home.
Yep.
So to now, like, working on an international level, producing something that's part of your, I don't know, nostalgic childhood, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With a team of on the better half of almost 100.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
I mean, it's incredible, and it really is. I really am so grateful for it. There's so many steps along the way that I've got to remember.
Yeah.
And notice and recognize that gratitude, because there were so many steps where if I didn't have the right people around me, or if I didn't have, if the timing wasn't right at that point, I would have turned away from animation. I know that I would have.
Interesting, because I was going to ask you, what pushed you through to come here, but you're saying if timing wasn't right, you were about to say, this isn't right for me.
Yeah, I was looking at different options. I loved teaching, I really did. So I thought that could be,
So did you give yourself a cutoff point and say, like, if I'm not somewhere in the next month, I'm not going to bother, and I'm just going to teach?
It wasn't that black and white, mostly because the Mukpuddy stuff sort of came into my life so naturally, if that makes sense. Like, it was so gradual that all of a sudden I was in the middle of this production, and I thought, okay, this is actually what I want. This is it. Working with a bunch of people, making stuff that we want to make, telling our stories, that felt like, okay, I was like, okay, this is it. Why have I been exactly, why have I been toying with other ideas? And and even before then, the ad work and stuff was going really well. Like, financially, that was a bit more consistent, to be honest. I was working with Saatchi and companies like that, doing storyboarding. But I was like, nah, this isn't quite for me. I want to tell my own stories.
Yeah. So what would happen, going forward in the future? Say Bad Jelly doesn't work out. Maybe there's a big drought of animation for a while. You have to make layoffs. Like, what would keep you going through that?
I think the people around us here, to be honest.
Yeah.
This seems like it's just a big love letter to the studio, but it kind of is. Like, I get to get up every day and make cartoons with my best friends.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been easy the last few years. We have taken on service work and amongst the other stuff, and those turnarounds are tight and the budgets aren't as good. But I have confidence in this working at this point. The momentum's going in the right direction. So I really do feel this is, yeah, everything's going the right way. And even if, if there's a break or a pause along the way, I think if you're into it, I think you'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think at this point I want to stop telling stories, or at least being involved in the storytelling process.
Well, now you've had a taste. Well, I mean, that kind of speaks to what you've said throughout your journey is, that community aspect, and also what brought you to animation in the first place, trying different things and telling stories. So that I think that's great.
Yeah. No, thanks, man.
Maybe just a question about the industry in New Zealand. It sounds quite small from where we talked about where, 1 out of 50 students is working in New Zealand. Has there been, now that you yourself as a mud, I always want it. Mukpuddy, you're over 50 people now. Does this mean that the industry in New Zealand has been increasing and growing, and more studios are popping up and more people are getting into animation there?
I mean, that is the other reason I want to stay here and grow this, is it feels like we are growing an industry for the first time. Like, Bad Jelly will be the biggest 2D production of this sort ever in the country.
Wow. That's quite incredible. And to be a part of that, it's kind of part of New Zealand's history in animation.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think so. As far as the rest of the industry goes, like there is animation happening down here. A lot of it is ad-based or service work. There are a few studios like Flux Studio. They do some stuff even for Disney. They do some really cool stuff over there. But as far as like 2D stuff goes, you're looking at ad work or lower end service work.
Yeah.
Very few places trying to do what we do, which is to create our own IP and tell a story start to finish. And that is what
super tough, but if you're the only ones doing it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? And also, like, there's like I said, there's 50 people who are in my course. Like, that's 50 creative people, even if they didn't, I'm like, where are those people? They need a place to tell their stories too.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is something I think about all the time. Like, I went to Sheridan College, and
of course,
I got into, I mean, I've always been into stop motion, but I also focused on stop motion in Sheridan. But out of my year, with the people interested in stop motion, I think only one other person has been able to get some work. And like, stop motion in Canada, it's almost non-existent. There's like projects here and there that are government funded, but that's about it. So part of what I want to do and see through is trying to build that up more here too, and bring more stop motion projects and whatnot. So I definitely feel you there. And it's a little bit disappointing to know that there are so many people. Even to go to animation school and pursue that is so challenging already. You have to maybe potentially go against your parents wanting you to become an engineer, and like figure out the finances and go to a different city and learn this really hard craft where you're head down and just drawing for hours and hours. And then to not get into that after all that effort, it's kind of sad.
It is. It's really difficult because I still do a little bit of tutoring here and there, and the kids get to a certain age, sort of once they've aged out of my course, when the parents are going, hey, what sort of universities do they go to? And it's really tricky. Like, ethically, I'm like, I don't know. That's a lot of money for a child to sign up to.
Oh,
where
totally.
I'm not 100% sure that they're going to make the money back. You know what I mean? Or at least work in that industry. It's really tricky. But at the same time, I met people who will be my lifetime friends, and I've met people who I'll create art with. So that's really important. I understand that's a huge part of it. It's the people you meet there. But it's difficult when there isn't an industry to support it. I think with remote working becoming more and more prevalent, it's getting better. And, even what I was doing freelancing, like, that was awesome. The fact that I was a kid who was able to, like, I say kid,
but I
was in my early 20s, managed to.
Yeah, but you also had a massive drive to do this on your own. Like, people ask me, like, younger animators say, like, how do I get in stop motion in Canada? And I'm like, you can't. You just have to push through with it with everything you got, or you won't, because you have to kind of make things happen yourself. And that's what you were doing when 49 other students potentially didn't have that same drive as you, and look where it got you. There weren't opportunities for you at some point, and because you stuck through it, you were in those places that the owners of Mukpuddy could see that, oh, this guy's serious. Oh, I keep seeing him at this place. He's doing this no matter what. So
and that I was interested in trying to make my own stuff. Like,
Yeah,
whether it's
that's
like, I did small comics, I did, children's books, I self-published children's books and stuff like that. The drive to want to make your own thing and trying to stand out that way. And I wasn't the best out there, but I kept at it. I think that's the other thing too. I always aimed to try to be undeniable with it. There are definitely illustrators out there better than me, but I stuck around and I tried really hard to networking's gross. I don't like the word networking at all, but I try hard to make friends with people, legitimate friendships with the people who are doing the stuff that I wanted to do. And I think that helps too.
So what do you say to those parents now when they ask what university does my kid go to, and you're thinking, well, it's a lot of money. I don't think, it might not be worth it how the industry's set up. And they say like, I don't mind anyways. Like, what would you?
Well, that's the thing. I try to be honest with them. I'm like, why are they going? Are they going just to learn the skill? If they're going just to learn the skill, I kind of think you can learn a lot of it online, particularly if they're like, quite young and they're savvy and they've got the time. I'm like, you can learn a lot of it online, or a lot of it just by doing it. You know what I mean? Animation is such a like pencil mileage sort of thing. You just need to actually do it. But if you want to go, and if another part of it is meeting friends and finding your tribe, like working out who you are, like a lot of us only find out who we are when we go to university, when we're around the sort of the weirdos who are weird like us.
So like you'd say, like maybe the parent is like my son or daughter or whatever. They are not really sure what they want to get into. They, I'm really hoping they find their people. You'd say go to university.
Potentially, as long as they can financially make it work. Right. It is just a huge part of it. Like a lot of people don't have that privilege. So it's like, if you can make it work, and it's different everywhere in the world, obviously, like in New Zealand now, your first year of university is free, which is
my gosh.
Awesome.
I would have loved that.
I think there are stipulations where you've got to finish 3 years or something like that. But like that makes it an easier yes, I would say.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to that, because it's, it took me a while to get enough money to pay all that stuff off. I was also so privileged that I had a support network. If I didn't have family and friends who would have helped if I was, really financially down, then I don't know if I would have taken the risk. So I've got to acknowledge that privilege. I really do. And I'm really grateful for it.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad that you've built yourself up in a career that, it sounds like you're reaching a really good place with, even our chat about finances and mental health and balance at the beginning. What is, looking forward, you're doing a lot of things that you already wanted to do. Looking forward, is there something that you're still working towards that you're like, dang, I really want this to happen, or I want this to be realized in my career or my life, or are you going with the flow is exactly what you kind of want?
Yeah, I like the idea of balance. I think balance is going to be the key for me in the next sort of few years. I want to regain that balance. I want to be as creatively fulfilled as possible, while being able to turn enough of that off in my brain. You know what I mean? To turn
so what would enable you to turn off the creativity?
Well, stability, which is what we're building. So the fact that we're building an industry down here, which hopefully means we have work for the next year and a half without having to hustle, that's huge. And again, a privilege.
And then that part of your stress mind is just relaxed.
A little bit, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to get that balance back, because like I really enjoy painting and drawing every day, and that's never going to stop. But I also want to be able to, like, I've been paddle boarding and stuff every morning. Like I've been cooking more, really like all that sort of thing. Yeah.
So, I've picked your brain out about a lot of things. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to talk about?
Nah, I've listened to you for over 100 episodes, dude. I know what you're. No.
Okay, is you can 100? That's crazy. I mean, I know there are a couple of you out there.
Yeah. No, totally. But like I said, it's huge. Like, people listen to podcasts sometimes to know that they're not alone in whatever they're going through. Particularly, like, it's not just me over here in New Zealand. There are other people outside of North America and Centralized Europe who listen to your podcast just because they're like, cool, this is a possibility. Or if, I wish this was a thing when I was studying. I wish
Yeah.
podcasts were more of a thing then, when I could have been like, cool, this is going to lead somewhere. I could be making
That's kind
my own
of been the
stuff.
progression of my podcast too. When I first started, it was just a tool to network within my own Toronto community because I didn't know anybody. And then I started learning more about, studios I could work for in the US. And then I realized, because of people like you that reach out to me and say, I'm listening from whatever country, I realized that there's a much more international audience that's interested in, connecting with other people around the world and figuring out what they're doing. So I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I have had a lot more international guests on this past year because I'm actively trying to have conversations with those people to build that kind of sense of community and connection and figure out what people are in different areas of the world. So I know there's, I've had a couple New Zealand, Kiwi people. What do I
Kiwis is good. Yeah.
Kiwi people. Yep. Kiwi's on already. So, and is amazing at making connections. So I think it's really cool that you know him too. So it's just good. It's just really nice for me to hear that. I'm chatting every week with people and I put it on the internet and don't really spread the word, and people are finding it somehow. So I think that's great.
And also the fact of, we work in these bubbles sometimes. We work, you don't know how far your reach is in any way. Like, slowly we'll be putting more and more stuff on the Mukpuddy YouTube channel, so international people will see all that stuff. But like, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I saw Silly Duck Wizard in our finest cinema down here in New Zealand during our International Film Festival in 2019. I rocked up to the cinema and saw that. Like, that played down here. I don't know if you. I'm sure you knew that. You
I'm pretty sure I knew about that.
Yeah, it was that they play an animated segment that is like a bunch of different animated shorts, and yours was in there, and it was one of the only stop motion ones, which I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but it stands out whenever it's in like a festival circuit. So I remember seeing that years ago in our nicest cinema with like it has opera seats and the ceiling is like painted with stars.
Oh my goodness, I should have flown down for that. I had no clue.
But that's awesome, right? You made this. Were you still studying at the time when you made that?
I was in school when I
Incredible. You made that while you were studying the other side of the world. And then like a few years later that played in our most prestigious cinema. Like,
I made it in 2019, so it played the same year that I made it.
Crazy. I'm sure it was that one, because I don't think the film festival happened in 2020. So it was awesome.
Well, now I need to look up the cinema and see how fancy.
I'll send you a photo. So
that's crazy how connected it is.
And I also think
like, it's, for me, sometimes it's easy to get caught up in numbers and say like, 100,000 people or whatever. But also like, doing something that impacts one person is just as special sometimes. And
it's huge.
Something that, maybe in animation, you don't get funded for impacting one person.
Totally.
It just kind of reminds me of why I'm doing this in the first place. So that's good to hear. Thanks for sharing that.
No, totally. It's exciting. You never know the reach you're going to have with anything we make, and I think that's also the drive that keeps people going, right? You don't know who.
Well, even the story with I think you said Alex, his name was, sharing that one tweet, which is crazy. So all right. I'm going to take that away from this chat. Just you never know who you're going to impact, what's going to happen, and work-life balance. All right, Matt. Well, is there anything else you wanted to share now that we're wrapping up?
Nah, check out the Mukpuddy YouTube channel just to see our stuff. As I said, it's hard to get it. A lot of our stuff is geo-blocked, but we're going to slowly release everything on YouTube now that the New Zealand licenses are done. So it'd be cool for people to see our stuff. Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to pick your brain and to meet you. I think it's great.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Jerry.
All right. And like Matt said, if you want to check out Mukpuddy's work, you can check out their YouTube channel. I'm going to include a link in the description of this chat. So please go check that out. And that's all for now. So thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye. The music for this podcast was composed by Willem Mendo and the graphics by Luhan Wang. I encourage you to look them up if you've enjoyed their work.